Atmosfear by Nobody. Chapter 8. The Temple. These two almost fatal road accidents had even further stirred my partner's longing for divine protection, and so he began to visit our neighbor, the snake-eyed Quran teacher, at his mosque almost daily in order to learn new passages from the holy book. One early noon he returned from his usual morning prayers and told me that Mohammed, yes, even his new teacher's name was Mohammed, just as every other guy in this country seemed to be named, had often inquired if I could join him in order to visit the local mosque together. "He is always asking for his new friend Tom," my partner said with a snort. "Well," I answered, "his friend Tom will have to let him down on this one." I was indeed eager to see the house of worship itself, as it would undoubtedly supply me with plenty of fresh impressions and ideas, but I had developed a distaste for the neurotic and fundamentalist-minded preacher from the get-go. My hope was to visit the place without his patronizing oversight, but no, the gods had a different plan in mind. After practicing our songs for a bit, we then went down to have dinner at our usual cozy cafe next to the busy main street. But my appetite was somewhat ruined as I soon noticed an all-too-familiar, lanky figure slithering towards our table from the other side of the street. "Look who's there," my partner said. "It's your special friend, Tom." And so it was. Dressed in a spotless white cloth from head to toe, with only his dark face and hands sticking out, our determined teacher flew to the scene with the air of a hurt lover. "Why haven't you come to see me yet?" he demanded point blank, while grasping my hand. I mumbled. "Had lots of work to do and all that." "Allah's waiting for you, my friend. You will come to see the mosque now, after you finish eating?" "Well, sure," I said, giving myself up for this great cosmic joke. "That would be interesting." I wasn't lying, of course. It seemed vital to study the spiritual headquarters of these people if I was ever to get a better idea of their fascinating and admirable way of life. It was particularly intriguing how the Guineans appeared to be torn between three cultural currents, which were Islam, French Christianity, as well as their own ancient, and to my opinion their most valuable asset, the esoteric pantheism of Mandeng. It had to be challenging for one to find their own personality when pulled between these largely opposing ways of life. Watching us enjoy our plates of chili-laden fish on a rice bed without agreeing to partake in them himself, the snake man sat and waited impatiently for us to finish our repast. I made sure to take my time, as I didn't want my Epicurean pleasures to be ruined by the presence of this pitiful life-denier. Finally, after we had wiped our mouths, drank our coffee, and smoked our cigarettes, our guide jumped up from his seat and led us down the street with alacrity. As if I was about to escape him still, he kept pulling me along by the arm, all the while feeding me with anecdotes from his personal history. "I was a singer too when I was young, you know," he told me in a husky, strangely musical voice while showing me a series of photos from his phone. "And dancer too, look, you see? I was very known in Guinea for my talents." "Fascinating," I said while looking at the grinning, effervescent young boy in the pictures, wearing colorful disco apparel and looking every bit like a different person. No, a different species from the bitter, fidgety fundamentalist who marched stiffly beside me. "And you gave it all up because of religion?" "That's right," he said, with a faint note of sadness in his voice. "We cannot do that and also have a good relationship with God. It was my personal sacrifice. You know, I was so famous actually that I won the national Michael Jackson dancing competition in the 1980s. I almost got to meet Mr. Jackson myself. But then there were some problems with his schedule or something like that. Knowing what Wacko Jacko liked to do with his little dance competition winners, I didn't consider it to be a major loss for the Snake Man to have missed this opportunity. But I kept mum about it, and instead inquired about the different routines and dogmas of the religion of Islam, which seemed quite demanding if one was to adhere to them seriously. Still, from what I had heard thus far, most Guineans thankfully took a more relaxed approach to the demands of worship. "Are you going to quit music too one day?" I asked my partner playfully, and his bright but slightly subdued grin told me that there was nothing to worry about on that subject. In order to prove us that he was something of a household name around the neighborhood, our guide stopped every other person we met along the way and chatted with them, applying slaps on the shoulders liberally as well as serious, patronizing words to all and sundry. Finally, after a brief, pleasant walk next to the lively main road in the purple-hued evening, we finally stopped in front of a large, whitewashed building that had a smooth white stone wall going around it, ending only at a pair of sturdy iron gates. "Here we are," the Snake Man said, opening the latch and once again taking hold of my hand with irresistible decisiveness. "Now, please follow me and do exactly what I tell you." "Sir, yes, sir," I said while throwing a humorous wink at my partner, who seemed a bit afraid that I might embark on some comical performance in order to make fun of this frantic priest of ours. But he worried in vain. I wasn't that barbaric as to mock local beliefs, especially as they seemed much more vivacious and admirable still than those of my own country. In Finland, almost no one believed in God or the afterlife, except the worst kind of religious fanatics, much like our Snake Man was. All the rest of the people were hard-boiled atheists, cynics, and materialists, devoid of any appreciation of the magical aspects of existence, let alone of karma, metempsychosis, or transic meditative states. The only things that had any value to these life deniers were numbers, and the bigger numbers, the better. All else was hogwash, and this sordid state of mind showed itself in the cynicism that most Finns had towards any ideals of love, empathy, respect, prayer, and responsibility. Instead of entering through the main doors of the mosque, our guide took us around its outer corner, where next to the wall there was a low cement rut as well as a long stone bench running alongside it. A young, raggedly dressed guy was standing close by, selling what appeared to be small portions of water in rusty little soup cans. My partner bought one can for each of us, after which I was directed to sit on the bench and apply the water to wash my hands, feet, neck, and face repeatedly, all the while chanting the familiar phrase Allahu Akbar, God is powerful. I personally love this particular phrase. To me it was just as poetic and empowering to recite as was Aleister Crowley's famous axiom, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." But the ablutions themselves were not as enjoyable. It was a thorough cleansing as if I was going on a date with a germaphobe. The teeth, ears, nose, eyes, the whole works had to be rinsed and scrubbed many times over. I was starting to worry whether I'd have to fish out the old white mamba for a wash as well, but thankfully these rituals did not reach that far. Instead, I was finally asked to leave my sandals at the stone steps and then enter the holy house alongside my two guides. The temple itself had been built simply but eloquently, with large Arabic Quran excerpts painted on the walls that looked like works of art on their own. Actual pictures of religious nature, as I well knew, were strictly forbidden in Islam, which I considered to be a great loss, knowing the achievements of the Great Eastern as well as some of the Christian traditions of iconography. Large and eloquently woven, though quite worn mats had been placed over every inch of the cement floor. The high concave ceiling gave an impressive echo to every sound that was produced. But as of that moment, I could only hear our snake man's droning voice, since the place was still empty except for ourselves. "Let us pray," he whispered, and showed me the necessary choreography, which I tried to mimic as well as I could. Much to my surprise, I immediately began to feel a great sense of harmony while performing it, moving my muscles and lips in unison with these two dark-skinned men. In fact, I felt much more alive and in contact with God than I had ever felt in a Finnish church. My family in Finland on my father's side had been Laestadians for many generations. The Laestadians, mind you, were a cult variety of Christian Protestants, but only far more extreme in nature than even old loony Luther had been. Commanded by their mad prophet Lars, the Laestadians had banned television, movie, almost all music, and most of literature, not to mention alcohol, contraceptions, abortion, wearing makeup, and premarital sex. A true death cult if there ever had been one, and of course plagued with rampant pedophilia among the clergy. They were the worst kind of bigots by all accounts, and though most of my younger cousins from that side were kind souls and no longer followed these deadly dogmas to the hilt, I still had always felt out of place among them. This is exactly what my father had experienced in his youth as well, choosing to run away from his abusive family in order to start anew, far away from the long shadow of the cross. Allahu Akbar, I kept repeating on my knees alongside my new friends, all the while thinking to myself what those Jesus freak relatives of mine in the north would say if they'd see me now. After all this refreshing kneeling and bowing, we were finally allowed to sit down on the lush carpet and commence our religious studies, courtesy of our guide, whose liquid eyes glowed with exuberant inspiration. What an opportunity it was to be able to proselytize to a white man! "Look at all this life," he said to me, expanding his arms around the empty hall of prayer. "All the life around you, do you think it was all an accident?" "Hell no," I answered, and stopped to correct myself. "Sorry, I mean no way it is an accident. Nothing, I believe, is coincidental in this universe." "Yes, my friend," the preacher went on, excited by my acquiescence. "You see the hand of God in everything, don't you?" "Absolutely," I said with full conviction. "God is everything and everywhere." I was about to add that each one of us indeed were gods ourselves, just as the bodhisattvas had taught since millennia ago. But perhaps it was for the better that I was interrupted, since this wasn't a very orthodox view in Islam. Nevertheless, my profession of creed only encouraged our guide to continue his lecture with doubled enthusiasm. "Do you know how the child is conceived?" he asked. "Let me tell you." "Of course I know," I tried to put in. But no avail. The man was now off on a tangent that allowed no interruptions. "You understand, yes, but listen. The child is conceived in the womb of the woman with the help of God's hand. When the seed enters the body..." Oh, boy. Truth be told, it was quite embarrassing to listen to, bringing to my mind the sex education classes from my junior high school, except that this particular spiel was spiced with a hefty dose of bigotry and homophobia. But hey, if you bought the ticket, you had to take the ride. "Imagine," the snake man said while grabbing my hand again to strengthen the effect of his juvenile rant. "Imagine with your mind how the sperm swims through the birth canal and..." "Oh yes," I chimed in, "and the man is laying on top of the woman." "Yes," he answered. "Or maybe the woman is on top of the man?" I pondered out loud. "Either way," our teacher said. I had an extremely hard time not to break out in a holler of laughter despite my partner's pleading glances at me. But thankfully, this cringy babbling was suddenly cut short by a sharp yell that bursted through a pair of loudspeakers from the ceiling of the hall. Allahu Akbar! Jilted by shock as the tranquil silence had been shattered so violently, we turned to look behind us and saw a short, stocky man who perfectly resembled a garden gnome with his pointed little cap and long white beard. With his eyes shut tight, this comical brown leprechaun was bellowing into a microphone from the top of his lungs, obviously in order to summon the congregation into the hall of worship. Allahu Akbar, he kept repeating, not a bit musically like I heard others sing it out, but in a straight-out holler as if he was selling bananas down the market street. It kept on and on until the room finally began to fill up with local men and women. These two sexes were separated from each other by a large white canvas that was quickly drawn across the room to act as a partition. This was apparently done in order to ensure that one wouldn't be disturbed in their prayers by any lustful thoughts. It made sense to me, seeing how beautiful the women were who entered the temple, dressed in their finest, and with their slender naked legs crossed beneath their well-formed buttocks. But let's get back to God, damn it. Finally, the Imam himself, an ancient-looking mummy of a man, entered the hall through a little side door, wearing layers upon layers of heavy, brightly colored robes, stacks of wooden prayer beads, as well as a huge conical hat that would have befitted a mad pope. At once all the worshippers formed themselves into long lines to face him, and after this was done, we began the prayers that were similar to the ones that Snake Man had just taught me. I was greeted with smiles from the other worshippers who were obviously intrigued by the fact that there was a white man present at the scene, perhaps the first one they had ever had there to participate in the gimmicks. Despite my initial cynicism, I actually began to feel an increasing sense of belonging with these kind-hearted, passionately reverential people. Though I understood nothing of the sermons and prayers that this buckethead of a priest was delivering in Susu, still I felt like I was a part of this downtrodden group who only prayed for love and peace to enter their souls and the entire world through the mercy of their God. It was no matter what name we decided to call him, or it would be a more fitting term, since it was after all in all of us, who are nothing but reflections of the Great One that contains everything in the entire universe. So there would be no fear of not reaching out and being heard, no matter from what corner of the world you sent out your prayer. What mattered was that your heart was open and receptive, both to give and to accept universal love and peace that passeth all understanding. Once we finished our prayers, I expected us to be able to vacate the premises finally for a deserved cigarette, but I was in for another kind of treat completely. The wrinkly old Imam hobbled over to us, took me by the hand, and sat me down next to him, mumbling something in Susu which my partner tried to translate to me as best as he could. "Boy," he said with a worried look on his face, "these people are going to make you Muslim now." "What?" I said. "This wasn't part of the plan." "My brother," the Snake Man said, sitting next to me and putting his hand on my shoulder. "It is all a part of Allah's plan. You will enter his holy house and join us in heaven, will you?" "Oh, sure," I said with a glance at my partner, who looked like he was sitting on hot coals. "Why not? It's better than Christianity anyway." "Good thinking," the Quran teacher affirmed, and led me on down the ritual of the conversion, which included prayers and incantations, all the while the rest of the congregation sat around the four of us with an air of expectant jubilation. This was certainly the first time that a white man was being baptized in their holy house. The positive PR of this stunt would be unimaginable, and it would certainly secure our guide a place at the right-hand side of his god in the afterlife. So everyone was happy, except for my partner, who took it all for a joke since he knew what my personal philosophy of life was in reality. So, he still went on translating the ancient imam's husky words. Now you have to select a new name for yourself. A Muslim name, you know. Sure thing, I said with a grin. But I'm not gonna be Mohammed, I tell you. There's too many of you guys around here as it is. What else you got? Well, man, there's Yusuf, Abdul, Ishmael. Ishmael, I said, being a huge fan of Moby Dick. Call me Ishmael then, by God. The Imam was pleased with my answer and went on with his incantations that I followed as best as I could, all the while trying not to break into a fit of laughter over the absurdity of the situation. Oh yes, if only my Lestadian relatives could see me now. Or even better, my atheist friends. In the midst of this jollity, I suddenly remembered that all Muslims were to be circumcised before becoming 100% legit, which made me pale with fear. But no, to my great relief, I just needed to hold up my hand and make a few last oaths, after which I had been officially born again as Ishmael. The rest of the congregation crowded around me, each offering their hand to shake and saying in French, "Welcome, brother Ishmaela," which made me feel like part of a community for the first time in my life. It was a flashback from the parochial days of Europe, when everyone knew each other in the village and were acquainted with all the service providers more or less personally, from the mailman to the baker. In modern Finland, all we had were nameless, faceless goons of the large corporation chains who circulated in and out of our lives without leaving any memories or personal connection. We had been stripped of each other's company, left with nothing but meaningless rituals of transactions that might as well been carried out with robots. After I had shaken every hand present, it was time for the collection of contributions from the worshippers, collected by none other than the dark garden gnome, whose hands quickly filled up with bills of various denominations. I observed this event with a slightly cynical air, unable to help myself, thinking whether all this Skrilla was actually going into the pockets of the Imam for his own fun, as the Christian churches often let their contributions run along. But no, perhaps catching the look on my face and reading my thoughts, the Imam, once he had been given the wad of bills, walked over and gave them to me. Hey, I said, blushing deeply red. I'm not going to take your money. I have plenty of money of my own. Tell them, Mohammed. My partner tried to reason with the generous zealots, but it was to no avail. For better or worse, the Imam was adamant to prove a point to me, perhaps the fact that he was not indeed in it for the money. Well, I didn't dare to resist the master of the holy house, did I? Even though I felt really sorry for these people who were much poorer than myself, some perhaps even barely able to get by, I finally stuck the thick wad into my pocket so that we could finally go out to have our cigarettes and rid ourselves of the snake man, in whose company we had been for over 5 hours by then. But, oh no, he invited himself back to our hotel, so that he would still have a chance to lecture me some more about the wonders of his faith, or our faith, as he now called it. On our way back down the darkening evening, we met many of the worshippers along the way, who all greeted me as Ishmael now. Yes, hello, I said, while my partner sniggered quietly. Salam alaikum to you all. Now everyone knows you are one of us, the snake man said, while happily rubbing his hands together. Let me explain to you at what times you have to make your prayers. Night had fallen and the stars were again twinkling above us in the dark air that was seething with insects and bats hunting them by the time we made it back to our Bullywell Palace rooms. But the Quran teacher was still not done. He had one more lesson to give us before we could call it a night. "Look at these," he said, and produced from his pockets 4 sweetmeats, each of which was wrapped in a different fashion. The first one was fully protected by its paper, the second had a few holes punctured through the cover, the third had only a shred of protective layer, and the fourth was completely without a wrapper. "Now," he said, and threw the candy on the ground as we sat on our terrace in the darkness, since the power was once again out. "If you were to choose one of these to eat, which one would you take?" Quite naturally, I pointed at the one candy that was fully wrapped. "Correct," he said, and gave it to me. "Now these candy that remain, they are like women, no?" Ah, yes, I thought to myself, here we go. And so our teacher began a harebrained rant about why women should dress from head to toe in covering clothes with no exception. This terribly misogynistic rant made me blush with shame and almost sent my partner to another fit of laughter, all of which the Snake Man was completely ignorant, as he finally concluded his moral lecture and bid us good night. Before this, though, he was able to fish out my phone number so that he could call and come check up on me at times. "And don't forget to come pray at the mosque," he hollered as he finally slithered out of our yard with the aid of his phone flashlight. "Oh, thank God," I said and lit a cigarette after he was out of earshot. What a fucking day it was. "Yeah, man," my partner said. "I didn't understand they want to do this to you, man. It's fucking crazy. But anyway, I will show you how to pray tomorrow in the morning with my mat." "Ah, shut up, man," I grunted and threw him half of the wad of bills that I had gotten from the mosque. "Here's the deal. You can have half of this money on one condition. You let me alone with that stuff, okay?" "Okay, Ishmaela," he said, taking the bills and getting up with a laugh. "Let's go to bed anyway, right?" "Yeah," I said, counting my money with an ever-widening smile. "By the way, are there any other mosques we could visit around here? I kind of like this conversion business." "Fuck that, you crazy man," my partner sniggered and went to bed, leaving me alone with my God, who obviously had a great sense of humor.